So, if you don't know what this panel is about, it is called Africa's Moment. Thank God they've changed this time. It used to be Africa Rising. Now that we have risen, it's Africa Moment. Yeah, people say I'm funny. That's true. It is called Africa's Moment, Seeking Continental Integration and Persistent Challenges. That's a lot of grammar. We'll break it down. And to be able to do justice to this conversation, I have with me Ambassador Nur Soman, Director General of West and Central Africa, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Republic of Turkey. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for her. And then I have to my left, Murede Mutiga, Africa Program Director at International Crisis Group. Please put your hands together for him. And of course, it's 2 versus 1. Yes, are you prepared, Murede? These 2 powerful women, and you're not sandwiched. You're not sandwiched. Okay. Oh wow, 3 versus 1. Sometimes I forget. I have with right there in the middle, Amaka Anku, Practice Head Africa Eurasia Group. Another round of applause for these 3 amazing people. Let me just quickly set the course for this. So, I made a joke the other time. I said it used to be Africa Rising, and now it's Africa's Moment. Since 1963, when the Organization of African Unity was founded, our leaders wanted so much for Africa to be fully integrated. And then the organization evolved in 2002 to the Africa Union. And still they continued the conversation about integration because they had a dream. And the dream was for a prosperous Africa. Whatever that was going to look like at the time, they didn't have it all fully fleshed out. They hadn't dreamed the whole details. They just wanted a prosperous Africa. Many years on, 43 signatures, 43 countries later and 11 signatories, they came up with the Africa Free Trade Agreement area in 2018. And, they had a working document to say, this is what it is going to look like, at least economically. But prior to that time, we've been integrating regionally and just trying to figure out how things are going to work. Now, AfCFTA is the biggest free trade area in terms of member states. But just second only to the World Trade Organization, if I'm correct. And that's huge. And we just want to talk about what that's going to look like in real terms for Africa, for African countries, how that could possibly disrupt the global economy, even the politics, the diplomacy, the policies, and the challenges that continue to stare African countries in the face. Coups, climate change, ethnic rivalry. The list is endless. But then again, the opportunities too. So, to answer some of these questions, I would start with Ambassador Nur Soman. Turkey is one of Turkey's foremost diplomats who's done extensive work in Africa. In fact, I'm very much, I am very much impressed, and I guess impressed is not the word because she puts in the work, with her knowledge of Africa, the politics, and just the understanding of the issues. And my first question to you as quote unquote an insider-outsider is, what would you say the challenges and the benefit of an integrated Africa is?
Thank you so much, first of all. Of course, I need to say that there are so much advantages when we are talking about Africa. We can talk about, of course, for me, according to me, you have a very young population, a dynamic population. I think it's the most important. Vast resources and rich and deep-rooted culture and history. So there is an enormous potential. I was really very surprised when I went first time in Sub-Saharan Africa, when I was ambassador in Conakry. I liked it so much. I said that we cannot know, if we don't go to Africa, we can't understand the potential. So And I'm sure that for a better world, this is sure that we need Africa. So there is really enormous potential. But of course, there are, of course, some challenges. The challenges is not coming just from Africa itself. It's coming, there is negative impacts of global international crisis. And of course, Africa is the biggest victim of global warming and food security issues today. There are really different repercussions. But so, you know, the world is suffering from multiple crises, and that fit each other. So against this background, I think that Africa should take its fate into its own hands, because Africa can make it. They can make it. It is clear that they need to develop their own capacities and structures to address all these issues. So I can assure you that I'm convinced, and we are convinced in Turkey, that Africa has all the resources at her disposal to realize its bright potential, for sure. So we can name here specific flagship projects like African CFTA or silencing the guns, as well as again, I will repeat, the African youth itself. These are main instruments to realize all this potential.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you for that brilliant response. Does anybody want to jump in on her response, or should I just go to you, Beridi?
Yeah, thanks, Adesha. Actually, just to add to the ambassador's points, it's World Cup time now, as we all know.
Yeah.
And it
Who are
always,
you rooting for? Of course, it's Morocco, right?
Yeah, now we are all with Morocco. But you know, that's the point. There are very few continents around the world where you find that across the continent, everyone is backing every African team. And that just shows that in terms of the people, the ordinary people, there are very few real divisions. There are a lot of cultural connections, as the ambassador says. I remember a time I'm from Kenya when the vice president had a brother who was a cabinet minister in Uganda, you know, because he was from the border between the two countries. So there's an enormous potential, but much more needs to be done. I think when you look at the aspiration of the African free trade area, just the potential shows you the missed opportunity, to the extent that if you look at other places in Europe, it's 68% of the trade is between the various countries. In North America, it's 48% within that caucus. And in Africa, it's always hovered between 12 and 13%. That's way too low. There are a lot of artificial barriers. It's very hard to fly between countries. It's very hard to just have tariff-free access,
Yes,
and it's really, really a moment of opportunity. There's a youth bulge. A lot of those youth will continue to demand more, and so African leaders really need to seize the chance to harness that opportunity.
Brilliant. And you said something, I think you kind of hit the nail in the head. Wherever I go in the world, and I see a black person, automatically, it's like a magnet. To be like, oh, hi, it's the sister, hi. Because, you know, it doesn't matter whether I'm Nigerian or they're South African and all. It's just like, you just connect. And that's, you know, that's what I believe that's what you mean by there's really few real division among us. Is a united, integrated Africa a utopia? And if it is not, what would it look like in real terms?
Can I just jump in?
Go on.
So we often talk about potential and promise when we talk about Africa. And I think, and I want to reset our baseline a little bit, because I think that we often also forget how young the continent is in terms of self-determination, okay? So most African countries, and if you look on the west side, West African countries, most of them are about 60 years old.
Yeah.
On the southern side, most of them are even younger than that, because they got independence in the 70s, okay? Think about the US at 60.
Oh my God.
Think about the US at 60. The US at 60 was 1836. Think about the US at 1836. Who could vote in the US in 1836? A huge proportion of the American population could not vote, could not participate in the political process. This was decades before the American Civil War. Elections were extremely violent, right? We were, you know, so violent elections, lots of corruption, and this is US at 60, right? So sometimes when we compare Africa,
And it's unfair.
African countries, to where, developed countries are today, forgetting that it took them quite a while to get there, right? Like the Europe started talking about integration after the Second World War, and then it took them 75 years. It took many, many years to get there, right? So I just want to
just want to lay that
I just want to
foundation.
say there's lots of promise and opportunity, but let's also recognize that the African continent, a lot of countries in Africa are doing something that most industrialized countries did not do.
Absolutely.
Which is trying to develop and industrialize as an actual, egalitarian, democratic,
Ethnic.
where everybody can vote. In America, it wasn't so. In Europe, it wasn't
At
so.
60.
Women couldn't vote. I mean, up until the turn of the 20th century, women
Right.
couldn't vote in most parts of the
A
world.
round of
right?
applause
So-
for that
so
thought,
that's
please,
something
ladies and
to
gentlemen,
just
please.
remember.
True, so let's just lay that foundation. Let's take the pressure off. Africa, you need to do this, you need to do that. Guys, calm down. We're just calm down. Okay, right. But I wanted Murida to respond to that because everyone knows that the concept of a united Africa, some people think that it's impossible, that we're not homogeneous enough ethnically, politically. Do you agree? Do you think we can achieve that? What should that look like?
Yeah, so just to follow up on Amaka, I very much agree. Someone was pointing out when examining the conflict in Ethiopia, and a very wise diplomat was making the point that you leaders, despite this being such a difficult moment for you, you're probably the generation that's going to shape what kind of nation, what kind of state emerges. And very few countries in the world are grappling with such challenges. As Amaka says, these are much older countries where, previous generations are the ones that tackled these very difficult questions about who is a citizen, what kind of state it is, how do you build a nation. So it's not to understate the complexity, but also I think we should not also, almost have low expectations to the degree that some of these things are eminently doable. There's no continent in the world that has more landlocked countries than Africa. That's partly because almost all the boundaries are colonial, they're invented. And how easy would it be, for example, to have easier travel across the continent? It doesn't take very profound reconsideration of some of the airline agreements. For example, a lot of African countries don't have airlines, but they impose a very high fee for airlines within the continent to crisscross the continent. And sometimes you have to come to Europe, you have to come to Istanbul
get to some places in
connect
Africa.
to some parts of Africa. So I think the question is that given the complexity of the challenge, given the depth of the challenge, I think we need greater urgency and to be less complacent about.
But will it be? Is it
about what
achievable?
people need.
Is it achievable?
I think it's very achievable. When you look at some of the regional blocs, they've made a lot of progress. Politically, ECOWAS, the West African bloc, has become a very powerful voice. It intervenes quite aggressively within its neighborhood. The East African community is really quite integrated. The Southern Africans have done quite a good job of integration. I think what needs to be done is just more catalyzing actions that extend the benefits. If you look at the potential, more than 500 million people, potentially a $2 trillion economy. And as I said, a lot of the barriers are artificial, and it should be eminently easy, to pull them apart. What's missing is political will. The charters are there, the peace and security architecture is there, but the political will sometimes lags the need of the moment.
I'm gonna come back to Ambassador Nur because in a way she's an insider-outsider. Sometimes an observer from afar sees more than those inside, right? But before I go, the premise of this panel is we're looking at AfCFTA. We're finally at AfCFTA, at the AfCFTA point of integration for Africa. And I remember at lunch we were discussing how that could be disruptive to the global economy. The pros and cons of that, I wanted to ask Amaka. You're the one who advises foreign direct investors who want to go to Africa to do business, what to look at, the politics, because where politics, people don't understand that there's a lot of direct link between the stability of the politics of the country and the money that comes in. So I wanted to hear, first of all, tell us about how profitable AfCFTA would be for African countries and how it could potentially disrupt the global economy, if at all.
Okay, so I wanted to respond quickly to what Marithi was saying,
Go on,
and then I'll
please.
connect it to what I'll connect it to
Go
the
on,
question.
that would be fun.
So
Okay.
I'll connect it to the question.
Yeah,
so,
that's fine.
I think to follow up on your point, you said political will is missing. I think that's fair, but I think that even more important is capacity, state capacity, right? Because even where you have political will, and we've seen a lot of political will with the AfCFTA in terms of how quickly they've gone, but most African countries have very weak bureaucracies, right? And one of the things that we know we need, and now to your question, of building competitive economies is you need a competent bureaucracy, because you need a bureaucracy to regulate, right? You need to, have some smart industrial policies. You need to stimulate investment. And I want to say that this is one of the things that, in my view, we don't talk enough about. And a lot of foreign policy, a lot of global rhetoric about Africa tends not to focus on state capacity for various political reasons, right? So when we talk about, say, I live in the US. In the US, when we talk about Africa, it's always about human rights or corruption, right? Which, so you put that box, and almost as if the premise is, if you get the human rights right, and if you get corruption
You're going to be
right,
prosperous.
then you can get development. But nowhere in the world has that happened, right? This hasn't happened anywhere else in the world. Most countries got the economic development,
And then things got better.
and then figured out, because you're not going to figure out, you're not going to eliminate corruption when people are,
Poor and
70%
hungry.
of the country is poor.
Yeah.
And you don't have efficient bureaucracies to enforce the rules, and you can't provide security. And so I say this as I think, back to your question, the criticism. First of all, the rhetoric, the global rhetoric about Africa, we need to take out that box of human rights and democracy that, in my view, is partly it's politicized from the Cold War, right? Because you had to have this purist separation between autocracies and democracies, and we're kind of heading in that direction again, which worries me, because you're not going to get back to your question about the investments, right? I can't remember exactly how you framed it.
I just said, after
AfCFTA.
how it's going to affect, investment on the continent and what sort of risk evaluations are involved when you're talking to foreign investors.
AfCFTA only succeeds if we have something to sell to each other, okay?
Oh, and we do have a lot. Do you agree? Oh, there
We
you go.
sell a lot of raw materials, right?
That we need?
Africans we sell the world raw materials that the world develops, processes, right? Because we often don't generate enough power. We don't, we have lots of reasons for that. So the point I want to hear, it will succeed. A part of AfCFTA, and I know that they are thinking very seriously about this, is that you need to stimulate local production so that you're producing the things, right, consumer goods, that you want to sell to each other. Because if you think about, produce oil in Nigeria or, gold, how much gold and oil are you going to sell to other African countries, right? And so I'm saying, a part of the premise for AfCFTA is that we want to trade more amongst ourselves, but we have to produce more things to trade amongst ourselves. And so the premise has to be that we have to focus on building state capacity, focus on industrial policy to make sure that we're producing things, and use that larger market. And it makes absolute sense, because if you have a $3.5 trillion market, which is what it'll be, if you put, then it's a lot more advantageous for companies like our clients to say, I'm going to go locate production here so I can sell into this market, right? So to your question, what are the risks? The risk for companies is, right now, does it make sense for me to go spend a lot of money investing in Burkina Faso when Burkina Faso's economy is like one street in New York? I'm exaggerating. One neighborhood in New York, right? So New York is like $1.5 trillion economy, right? And so, but if you have an actual region that's to 3 trillion, then it makes more
Sense to invest. where are they?
Yeah, if I could just jump in, very interesting points from Amaka, and I very much agree. You know, when you look at a lot of developed countries today were kleptocracies yesterday, and some still actually are a combination, you know, and so there was a lot of corruption in the past in the US, in Europe, but even structural corruption to the extent that the slave trade was essentially, you know, a huge transfer of wealth from one part of the world to the other. And so the moralizing and lecturing.
And the infrastructure of the time was also to serve the colonialists. It was never to serve each other.
Exactly.
All the trains and the transportation and everything linked to the seas and to the ports, all the way to Europe.
Yes.
Never amongst ourselves.
Absolutely. So it's a very false dichotomy, as Amaka says, to say that because there's corruption, because there are human rights concerns, there can't be development. Yeah. I think we need to be much more nuanced. But I would add that we need to think about, you know, given the wealth of natural resources, about being more activist and active about developing them within the continent. If you take the example of Botswana, quite recently they decreed that all the diamond they produce will be processed and refined within Botswana. And they required that the countries that actually do that in many, especially European countries, you know, transfer their industries to Botswana. So that's one example. And I would give, you know, I remember listening to a conversation between the former Nigerian central bank governor and a prominent Western media outlet. And, you know, they said, give us an example of laws that are unjust and that block African processing. And he said that if you process chocolate, if you do cocoa into chocolate in Ghana or in Cote d'Ivoire, you'll meet a very high tariff to export it to Europe. So, you know, there needs to be more justice in terms of the way that tariffs are structured and really to incentivize production and improvement in products within the continent.
I'm going to go back to Ambassador Nusserman. Africa has a lot of partners, and Africa is very attractive to any sensible investor. Any sensible investor. And for those of you who don't understand how global economy works, it's about surplus and I don't want to say scarcity, but need. And so somebody funnels it down to a place where there isn't enough, makes more money from there, and it goes back, and so it goes on. There has to be a demand somewhere, and there's got to be a supply. And I strongly believe that that balance may or may not be upset if AfCFTA becomes very, very, very active. And we've had so many partners over the, from during colonial days and now during our independent days and all. And it used to be the United States and many European countries, and Turkey is playing a really very competitive role on the continent right now. I think Turkish Airlines is still the most goes to all the African countries, I suppose.
Almost
all. I don't know if there's any other airline that does that.
In 41 African countries.
Yes.
With 62 destinations.
I mean, almost all. What, 6 or 7? And I know that, trade between Africa and Turkey has also grown nearly tenfold in almost 2 decades. And it's actually getting better. I do know that AfCFTA will affect everything as we know it right now, and I wanted to hear your thoughts about the benefits of this integrated Africa for Turkey, if you know.
Thank you for your question. Of course, we think that this will be a stepping stone for Africa's prosperity and well-being, because of course we are talking about the largest trade area in the world, right? When it will be realized, and with the by the number of countries participating to it. If I'm not wrong, it will connect, please correct me if I'm not wrong, it will connect, of course, 1.3 billion people across the continent with a combined GDP of $3.4 trillion. I don't know if it's okay. And this is really, we were talking about, it will help, I think, African countries to develop their exports, to accelerate their growth and attract foreign direct investments, of course. I think that bring new opportunities to develop our partnership, and I think it's not just valid for Turkey, it's valid for all the international community. I mean, we are talking about a huge, as I said before, a huge potential in human resources, agricultural, mineral, and we are talking. We know that 60% of the available farming lands of our planet is in Africa. So I'm not talking about the natural resources. So, and we have signed a protocol with the Secretariat of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Our Ministry of Commerce signed it. So I think that it will help to develop more. And we said that we are ready to work, because it's a huge work to do. It's not easy. We are talking about 54 countries. It's not easy. So I think that for us and we know that it will be increasing intra-African trade by almost 20%, I think, and so there is. It will help us also to be more present in Africa and increase our trade.
That's right.
And invest, of course, invest more.
Amaka is going to jump in.
So I want to jump in. Okay, let me put this. I want to jump in and take a crack at your question too. And I want to stay away from this idea that AfCFTA's success.
That's why I just say after. It's like, what am I saying?
Success would sort of endanger the growth of any other global economy.
Okay.
Here's why.
Yeah.
Okay. Because people thought that about China, right?
Yeah.
But China's growth made the West richer, because the West is exporting a lot to China. It's a huge market. Right? If you look at a lot of the biggest Western companies,
I think that deserves a round of applause.
There's
nothing to be afraid of.
They've made more money the richer China got. Apple, look at Apple. Apple now sells huge market, right?
Because
In
manufacturing is cheaper there.
And also selling, because there are a lot more people to buy your goods.
But wait
Now,
a minute.
if
I'm
you
sorry,
think about-
Amaka. Yeah, because I wanted this to be a banter.
Yeah.
Because then, okay, what if that production is in Africa? Because I think the fundamental reason why AfTA is important to a lot of African countries is that we can do everything within now, sell to ourselves, and maybe we sell the rest out.
Yeah,
Do you
but
think?
trade, nobody grows just by
Selling to each
selling
other.
to themselves.
Right, okay.
Right? And I think what's important, selling to yourself is great. It'll create more wealth, but then it gives you more wealth to buy from the world. Right? And if you look at the global economy today, the only two regions that are really growing, the fastest growing regions is Africa and Asia. There's no growth going to come out of Europe long term, right? People are getting older, they're dying. And the markets are saturated, right? So where are European companies going to sell? Who are they going to sell their stuff to? Right? If you look at all of global, in terms of like human capital, most of the world's population growth is coming out of Africa and Asia. Right? And it will increasingly become more Africa than Asia, right? We've already seen China has reached that peak where the population is starting to
I just want to buy from an African,
right?
African affiliated producer first before I consider a European product.
Yeah,
I hope it can be that.
My whole point is just look, AfCFTA, it's not a threat to anybody. It's not a threat to the global economy. It's an opportunity to create more wealth so that there's more wealth for everybody else.
Okay, well, that's settled now. Okay. Marielle, I want us to then begin to talk about, in real terms, in terms of policy and in terms of, diplomatic relations and conflict and coups and all these little but not so little things that continue to beset and set us back donkey years. I think it's a no-brainer to ask, can we have a fully well-integrated Africa without a peaceful Africa? I think the answer is obvious. But I guess what I want to point out is it possible to have everything? Can we completely have a no conflict Africa? And is it until when we achieve that we can have an integrated Africa?
Thanks, Adesho. And I'll just point out that, yes, there are very grave crises on the continent, but we also need to look at it in the round, you know. In the late 90s, you had multiple interstate wars on the continent, including very bloody ones. There isn't currently any ongoing interstate war on the continent. There are a couple where proxy conflict is taking place, where some are intervening in the internal affairs of others.
DRC and Rwanda.
Yes, but you know, in the DRC in the late 90s, you had 11 nations with their armies fighting against each other. So there is improvement, but there are also massive challenges. And of course, this is where Amaka's point is pertinent. You know, there are deep questions being resolved in real time about citizenship, about nationhood, and so that's to be expected. But the short answer is that conflict is a real hindrance to economic growth. It stifles potential. It leads to, you know, the destruction of lives, as we've seen with the terrible conflict in Ethiopia. But even for wealthy countries like the DRC, it's such an obstacle, a needless obstacle to progress. I think, just going back where we began, I think there is brilliant political peace and security architectures on the continent. We have seen the OAU, the Organization of African Unity, move to the African Union, say that they are moving from a policy of, you know, non-interference to one of non-indifference. I think we just need to see them practicing this, to see them actually moving in to actively prevent, but also quickly resolve conflict. It's encouraging. The African Union was, to a certain degree, involved in the resolution of, or at least the ceasefire in Ethiopia. We need to see that much more actively applied elsewhere. Conflict is a terrible hindrance to progress, although there is some tentative steps forward.
Thank you so much for that response. See, so people are no longer going to war in Africa with cutlass and stones. They get the guns from somewhere. They get the drones. They get all this really weapon of, you know, from somewhere. I just want to know, to what degree is the international community, where they get these things from, I'm trying to say it, affecting our ability to integrate. Because I tell you what, Nigerian president is one president who, throughout his 8 years, would wish, sometimes he wishes he probably never was president, and his inner caucus, this is inner gist, and because Boko Haram became the theme of his presidency. And whenever he goes to the UN, one of the things he used to say is, he would ask the international community, please, there are guns, illicit guns, small weapons, light weapons coming into my country. I'm doing so much, but this undermines what I'm doing. And there have been countries that have had to battle that. So I guess my question is, when it comes to our integration and the conflicts that persist, and how people actually are, how these terror groups and all that are able to operate, what is the role of the international community in this? It's a difficult question, but I know you'll weave your way around it.
Yeah, no, I mean, arms proliferation is a huge problem in Africa as elsewhere. Sometimes people ask, why are conflicts in northern Ethiopia and Somalia so deadly? That's because almost everybody can operate a gun. And why is that? Because they were major theaters of Cold War conflict. So, you know, for years you had Ethiopia swapping patrons between Moscow and DC, and being awash in arms. Somalia under Siad Barre really received, you know, a huge amount of small arms, especially, which fell into the wrong hands, became a huge problem. We also sometimes, the way attempts at conflict resolution, even where they may be well-intended, as we saw in Libya, it ended up in a cascade of weapons around the Sahel. But it cuts both ways, because it's also the choices that African leaders make that matter. You know, if you look at defense budgets for so many countries that really are quite poor, that need to be thinking about their populations, need to be thinking about health and education, there's a disproportionate amount that goes into the defense industry, into arms sales and arms purchases. And this really needs to change. You know, the minister was talking about the 60% of the world's arable land being on the continent. Can you imagine what a huge opportunity it is for countries, even, for example, Sudan and South Sudan, if they were to, you know, resolve their internal conflicts, focus just on agriculture, the opportunity would be immense. So I think it cuts both ways. The internationals have not been responsible in the way they've acted in places like Libya, in the way that they're very willing to sell arms to various fragile countries, but African leaders also need to make different choices.
Does anybody want to jump in on this point? Because the next question would be, what then should they be doing instead of complaining every chance they get at the UN General Assembly, just indirectly saying, please stop selling arms to splinter groups and all? Should we, on the policy level, be looking at what to do to block off the proliferation of arms on the continent? Because it definitely fuels our conflict, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, honestly, I think Muthi has done justice to that question. And so I just want to add, I think, you know, back to my point about economic development and state capacity. I think that most African countries' biggest challenge is mobilizing revenue, mobilizing capital, let's say capital, right? And I think our responsibility, I think where we start, where African policymakers should start, is mobilizing revenue internally. Because we have a lot of challenges attracting international capital, okay? So,
did you stare at my
we need
question?
to-
Because
yeah.
that was going to be my question to
We
you.
can, yeah, I know. I'm sure you still have a question to ask. Because, but what I want to say is, look, we need to focus on, I mean, some countries are doing better than others, but Africa, ex-North Africa, average revenue to GDP is about 18%. OECD countries, closer to 30. Okay, so there's a lot of room for growth. And when you improve your, and I know that a lot of that is because a large proportion of the economies are informal. So there's other, you know, there are other things that go into that. Digitization will help. But if you can improve your domestic revenue mobilization, you can invest in productivity. You can invest in the things that make you more productive and increase and including like infrastructure, like power, right? The things that would also help make sure that there's less fighting, right? Because if you look at much of the Sahel, for example, a part of what's been driving conflict there, part of it was climate change, right? In the 1970s, lots of agriculture pastoralists lost their livelihoods, right? From water drying up, from, you know,
Especially
pasture
the Sahel,
drying up.
yeah. And the
So there's
communities
no
started
place
fighting
for-
each other.
Yeah. So if there's nothing to do, what am I going to do?
And I do one.
I don't have any cows. There's no grass for them to eat. So a lot of herders became militiamen, right? So my point is, you need money as a country to invest in like relocation, you know, reversing some of those dislocations, and then, in my view, if you can start, you start with the things you can control. Build your revenue capacity, invest in productivity, and then figure out how to leverage that to attract more investment. I mean, you should also do it simultaneously, obviously, right?
Right.
But then it will, and this is why I always say, this is why I keep saying, we need to focus on that, even while we're thinking about resolving conflicts. But we're never going to resolve conflict until we solve the economic problem. Exactly. And every country in the world, that was what happened. Even in China, there was lots of corruption when the US started pumping a lot of money into China. But we didn't make that the focus of our conversations. Oh, corruption, human rights.
Yes, they always.
We talked about
everything we do in Africa is corruption.
Economic opportunities. That's what we need to be doing with Africa.
Okay, a round of applause for her, please. I'm going to Ambassador Nur Soman now. As Turkey is a very viable, very strong, has become a very strong partner of the entire continent. And now that we're talking about money, and I know that you're pretty much connected. You know all these private Turkish investors doing a lot of stuff on the continent and all. I wanted to talk to us about it. When people come and say, or when Turkish investors come to you and say, we're going to Africa to start a project and to do stuff, what kind of conversations do you have with them? And what direction do you point them?
Of course, I tell them, yes, you should go. This is, of course, the first thing that I'm saying. You know, actually, I can say that Turkey has become like, we can say, an African hub in our region because, you know, I think it's important because, you know, we have 44 embassies in the whole continent, which is a very important number, I think. I think that we are among the five countries who has more representations in Africa, and we have 38 African embassies in Ankara. So I think that it helps our businessmen, because when there is an embassy in a country, they think, okay, so the embassy is there, so we can go. So this is, I think, the first thing. It's that it's very important, and we have, as you know, we have a strategic partnership, because it's not just with bilateral relations with countries, but we have also a strategic partnership with African Union. So all of these, and of course Turkish Airlines, as you mentioned. So all these questions, and we have some more, like we have schools, we have our cooperation agency, we have, you know, many instruments which helps and we have, you know, we are signing agreements, we are making lots of visits. Our president is going a lot, our minister is going a lot to Africa. We are receiving many guests from Africa, which is very important. A lot, and in all these kind of, I think, contacts make it is something who helps the investors to go to Africa. And you know that there are very big companies who are investing. So you know that maybe it's not just about trade. The trade actually, now at the end of last year, 2021, it was $24.53 billion. So which is, I think it's a big, huge number. And our aim is to increase this volume to $50 billion. And
$50 billion. There's a dam. 50. 50. There's a dam in the DRC. Maybe you can help with that one. There is Ingan Dam needs about that. We have been trying to build that one since the 60s. Forget about all the other business. Go to DRC.
Okay,
because with that one, we can power the rest of Africa. Let's talk about that one.
Okay, well noted. So, and we have, of course, direct investments as well, and it has exceeded around $6 billion. So, I mean, we have around, I think that they are also, of course, we have contractors, Turkish contractors in sub-Saharan Africa. And so I think that we are doing a lot. I think that the difference, if you ask me what is the difference between other partnerships, maybe, the difference for Turkey is that we are sharing our experience, and you know, we are not going, I mean, we are having, you know, we are providing employment opportunities, and for us it is this kind of issues. I think that it's important in our
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yes.
You know, most African leaders, activists, social entrepreneurs, etc., are just sort of tired of the trope that Africa needs aids and hand-me-downs and etc. Hand-me-downs in the sense that we need aid, you know, like, you know, that begging bowl mentality. One country in Africa, arguably, according to historians, built, I hope there is no, is there a Belgian person in here? No. You know what I mean? We are not broke and we are not poor.
Oh.
Let us just put that out. The image that has been peddled in international media is insane. And I think any average person would look stupid anyway. If you look at an average African, you think they're poor. Well, that's your problem. And don't read what you don't believe everything you see on Google. We don't all live on trees. Um, you know, but the point I'm making is, you said the approach, the Turkish approach to investment and to relating to Africa is the beneficial. We're partners, not that we are trying to help you.
No, no, not at all. We don't. It's a win-win
Because I can tell you for
situation.
sure, I can tell you for sure that a lot of people have become very allergic to that idea, that approach, and some even will come off as rude. So when people want to come do projects, and please, you're not coming here to help us. That's the first thing they're going to tell you. Do your business, make your money, pay your taxes, and we're fine. And we grow, you grow, everyone's fine. How are you navigating that? Are you getting that kind of energy?
Of course, I mean, this is, I think, the most important thing in our partnership model. I think this is the win-win situation. I'm sometimes talking to some other diplomats from other countries, from Western countries, and I'm trying to explain to them that a win-win partnership is really possible with Africa. So this is not like that we are giving, they are taking, because people think that you are always giving to Africa and you are not taking anything in return. This is not true. This is all the contrary. I mean, we are winning, you are winning, so we are equals. We don't interfere in your internal issues. This is not our problems. You have your problems, we have our problems. Everybody has their problems. So everybody should find their solutions themselves. If you are asking for some idea, of course, because we still have some terroristic problems. So we have an experience. So we know that in some countries in Africa there are these terrorism problems. So we can tell you how we were able to
Overcome your problems.
to overcome this problem, so we can work together on that. This is all about sharing. We are learning from you. You are learning from us. It's a real win-win situation. As you know, I'm going very much to universities to talk with young people. So some of them are here. So I'm very happy to discuss with them because, first of all, before I start to speak about Africa, I'm asking to them, please tell me in one word, what is Africa for you? When I say Africa, what is the first things coming to your mind?
Please tell me what was the most ridiculous response you've gotten.
There were no ridiculous one, but
Okay.
one was very funny. It was dancing. It was dance. It is okay. I'm
Oh,
happy
tell me
with that.
Diane, that I can work with that.
It was nice, but they are all actually. This is not like what we are used to see in some kind of media. Let's say it's just about positive quotation. This is what I'm trying to do. What we are trying to do as Turkey to show the real image, the reality in Africa. Because what we see, poverty, there is poverty everywhere.
Yani.
Is there just in Africa? Everywhere there is poverty. It's normal. I mean, it's not something special to Africa. But of course, as you said before, we have a lot of things to do all together.
Yeah.
So this is this
Okay.
is my point of view. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, Amaka.
So I think that I know you mentioned the Grand Inga Dam.
Yes.
And I thought about it a bit because you had mentioned it earlier. And I think it's a great example to answer a lot of the questions that you had asked earlier about flow of investment. And, you
Because,
even asked
sorry,
her why.
Amaka.
But here's why. No, here's
Okay.
why. Because I think it shows how complicated some of these questions are, right? The reason the Inga Dam hasn't been built is because it's not really bankable.
What do you
Right?
mean
Let
by
me
that?
explain. Let me explain. So the way project financing works is, especially for power, is you secure off-take agreements. So you have to find who's going to buy this power. If I build a power plant that's going to sell power to people, who's going to buy the power? Okay? There's not enough people in DRC who can afford to buy power today. So a lot of people, the idea is that you're going to export a lot of this power elsewhere.
To the
But-
African countries
But
around.
there is no infrastructure There's no transmission or distribution infrastructure currently to do that. So I want you to understand how it's a chicken and egg, how complicated this is.
Yep.
So in order to get financing for something that expensive, you have to find the off-takers.
How are you gonna make the money
and
back?
get the agreements that they will buy. And then you take that to the bank, and the bank gives you money. Now, right now, you just
He wants
don't
to jump
have
in.
that.
It's getting more interesting.
So,
Okay.
so the reason I say that, that's why I say it's complicated, because you almost have to focus on that. Like, this is why AfCFTA has to work. You have to focus on stimulating domestic growth so that you can create more off-takers to allow you to do something like that.
Already, you want to jump in?
Yeah, no, just quickly, I mean, those are great points. And just to point to another one that really is an overlap of conflict and economic opportunity, which is the Great Nile Dam that Ethiopia has
Yeah.
built. Very often it's characterized as a potential source of conflict, as one that pits Cairo against Addis,
And
with
Sudan
Khartoum in the middle. When you look at it, it's a massive project, the biggest in the region's history. It's a green energy project because it focuses on, hydroelectric production, but potentially it's one that can integrate economies, not just to the north of Ethiopia, but also to its south. Already Kenya has inked power generation agreements with Ethiopia. If, once it gets completed, which potentially might be in the next year or two, you could have an explosion of irrigation in Sudan. Potentially, Egypt could also benefit from the food production in Sudan, and it potentially also can stimulate growth within Ethiopia so that Ethiopia manages to improve its economy and therefore gain from, more than the massive production of the Nile Dam. So it's one of those where it's perceived primarily as a conflict, a potential conflict, but it's one that can essentially, it's a trite point, win-win, but it's one where everybody can benefit.
And so the question is, why is it that all of the projects that can turn the continent around never gets the funding? Or just something is just always in the way of it? Amaka, what
I
are
just
you
explained-
what are you telling those investors?
Look, I think there are several factors. I just explained one of them. Sometimes it's as complicated as, there's no domestic market.
As far as I know, the DRC, the Ingan Dam, what I understand, I mean, the last report I read is that part of the 80 billion they want to raise for it is it's going to build the infrastructure. In fact, most of it is going to the infrastructure to channel
Yeah.
the power to the rest of the continent,
Yeah.
and that's how they're going to make money. And I understand, you
Yeah,
have to
it's
sign those
chicken and egg.
agreements with the other countries to say you would not buy power from anyone else. When this is operational, you're going to buy the power from us and blah, blah, blah. But still,
I'm telling you, that's difficult to. So a part of the challenge of infrastructure in Africa, and this is why I talked about revenue, is that it has to be substantially government financed. So if you're a private, my clients are, because if you're a private investor and you look at, say, inflation in Nigeria is 20%. If you invest in a road tolling project in Nigeria, that means you have to raise prices 20% every year. Think about the political implications of that. And it's happened in Nigeria where you
Yeah,
have tolling
Lekki
projects
Tollgate.
where they have to shut it down. The politics gets in the way. You're raising prices 20% every year. People start protesting. So if you're a developer, you're a bit cautious about that, unless there's a government guarantee. Unless there's a government to guarantee some of that risk and to say, you know what, even if we don't raise prices, we're going to cover X, Y, Z. So that's why, again, the burden ends up falling on a lot of African countries to be able to also be bankable. So I say that, of course, there's that, but there is also some built-in, biases in the international capital markets and financial system. That is true. We call it, there's an Africa premium.
Thanks for saying that.
If you look at there's been studies on it. Even Bloomberg is extremely foreign investor friendly. Even they wrote a report about this, right? If you look at African countries on comparable macroeconomic indices, and you look at some other countries, some of them in Asia, and you look at the credit ratings, dramatically different. dramatically different, right? They will have the same level of political stability,
they'll
inflation,
still
growth
mark
numbers,
Africa's down.
like Senegal, for example. But they'll still have very high risk premiums. So there's something else going on, which I think we can all imagine what that is, right? There's a because the market is a lot of perception, right? And I think there's a perception. Those people who look like this can't run their countries. People who look like that. I mean, look at Argentina. Argentina has defaulted. Before Argentina defaulted the last time, it was borrowing money cheaper than Nigeria, that has never defaulted. Because there's a perception, even though they run their country to the mess. And Argentina, one of the oldest, they're not Africa's mates, right? I mean, this is a country that's been around almost as old as the US, right? So it's not like, it's not like you can say they're doing any, let's just say, it's not like there's some proven track record of, amazing fiscal management, but they still get cheaper credits than a country that has never defaulted. So,
Yeah, it is what it is.
yeah.
Well, so I suppose how many more minutes do I have? I want us to talk about democratic governance, Morebi. AU's 2063 agenda envisions an Africa of good governance, democracy, and respect for human rights. However, there have been about 50 coups attempted and successful on the continent in the last decade, even as the AU continues to struggle to rein in coup plotters. We do know that they've done a great work in mediating some of these conflicts, etc. But what does that say about the continent's democratic governance, and what sort of level should it be in if we must integrate? I'm talking about democratic governance on the continent. Do we need it anyway?
Yeah, so that's a really big one. And I
Yeah.
would say that, of course, we must remember as you do that every country is different. Every region, even within the continent, is different. I'll give you a quick example. People look at coups and say, oh, terrible, there are so many coups on the continent. But there are different kinds of coups. So in Sudan, you had a coup that was really a revisionist one that wanted to roll back the aspirations of the street that wants a much more representative governance. But in the Sahel, actually, it's very complex. You had coups that were mostly welcomed by a lot of the public, reflected public frustration at the poor governance, at the lack of accountability. So it's a really complex picture. I would say that certainly not. I don't think you need the same system of governance in every country. To be able to integrate, you definitely, you can have toothpaste, and you can have economic integration, irrespective of regime type. I think what's important is that to remember that the youth really want services, they want better delivery, they want governments that deliver, and so state capacity, as Amaka has pointed out, almost what they call stateness, are the authorities in the capital able to deliver for the greatest number, as quickly as possible? I think that's the metric that needs watching. And I think on that score, that there is work to be done, but I don't really agree with the notion that only one regime type will mean progress.
Oh my God. Can I be sincere? Hashtag me too. Because I'm like, because, we are a great people. We're same color, except, well, in some places, different grades of blackness. But one size doesn't fit all. One size doesn't fit all, and I don't want to use the word unfortunately, but that's the truth. One size doesn't fit all, but there is this notion of uniform governing style, whether it is crucial. Some people don't like the way Paul Kagame is running the country, but is the country stable? Oh, I love. Okay.
You get some disagreements on that.
I'm just asking questions. Okay.
I think what we have to recall, though, is that sustainability matters.
Yeah.
And so sometimes one-man rule may deliver. I don't want to say any country is ruled by just one man, for the record, but it may deliver progress. In the meantime, it may lower corruption. It may mean the street lights are always on and everything. But I think you have to struggle with the question of sustainability. It's one that people on the continent have really wrestled with for a long time. We have to remember that Ethiopia, for a time, was governed very efficiently, and we have to give credit, to the Meles government, Prime Minister Meles Zenawi. They lowered infant mortality, they lowered malaria rates, they delivered education, they almost, were too successful in creating this youth that had a lot of expectations, but then they failed on political management and on inclusion. And that, frankly, led us where we are today, which is an outbreak of demands for inclusion and which have become very difficult to manage. So I think we have to be careful about that. And ultimately, yes, we have to think about what's the most sustainable model.
So what would that look like? Are we going to leave that to the leaders to figure out what system will work for every country?
Yeah, so I'm not qualified to answer such a big question. I think it's for people on the continent to figure that out. It doesn't have to be one model, a cookie cutter approach that you export from somewhere else. It doesn't have to look like that. Africa has evolved its own models, but a lot of those models, remember, were very democratic.
Yeah.
And they were very inclusive and involved a lot of consultation.
Yes.
And the great Nelson Mandela, when he came to power, he said that he was powered partly by his memories of coming from a clan that was led by chiefs, but those chiefs were very inclusive, they were very consultative, they were, they led by consent. So, we have models on the continent. It's obviously difficult to just say what model will work, which one won't, but it's important to think about what works for the most people over the long run.
Let me just add to say, I think we also, like Murithi says, a lot of sort of pre-colonial African societies were very what we would today call democratic.
Yep.
And so, but I struggle with that, that word has become so politicized, this democratic, because I think most African countries are happy, most populations are happy with the freedoms they have, are broadly happy with the model, but in my view, I think we focus too much on like some cookie cutter process, as if the process, forgetting that the process is a means to an end.
Right.
So my own sort of formulation, and I don't know, I feel like I would love to see more focus on state legitimacy, right? So that means the process is important because the process helps to avoid conflicts during transitions. Like he was saying, it's very important. But we also have to focus on the outcomes as well. So let's have it doesn't mean a different model. It just means that our paradigm, when we look at the models that exist, should not just be about process. It should be about process, but outcomes. So yes, you had an election. Great. But is the government delivering public goods to the people? Are you delivering security? Are you delivering, agriculture, food, whatever the people actually expect, right? So what does that mean for each country, state legitimacy? So I just think we should think about process, but also about outcomes.
Okay, I'm going to throw it open now, 1 or 2 questions, and then I'll take your final words. Anybody with a question here? Oh, there you go. Are we even... Bakar mısınız? We're going to need a mic for... I don't know how to say that one in Turkish. We're going to need a mic for him, please. Let's do that quickly because I have about 10 minutes. Thank you. And if you have a question, just come right here. Sir? You can come right here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mine is, thank you so much, first of all, for the great discussion. I think it really points out to the direction of where Turkey-Africa relations is heading to. And I think it's something to commend the efforts of both parties, Africa and the Turkish government. So there are 3 areas that are of interest, but unfortunately I couldn't get from the panelists, and I would like to throw it back to you. One is the digital economy. As you very well know that Turkey has emerged in the last few years as a nation that has invested a lot in digital technology, and recently we had the launch of the electrical car and many other innovations related in the fields of aviation and security. And in Africa, in as much as we are told that the digital economy is on the rise, I think it's an area we need to know how that Africa-Turkey relations can nurture that digital economy zone. The other one is sports. We've seen the contribution of Turkey to the emergence of African talents in most recent years. We've seen the Turkish Super League has been a pathway for many African talents. In Qatar, we've seen Vincent Abubakar, he used to play here in Turkey, and many others. We even have some Kenyan athletic clubs here in Turkey. So I'd like to know what are some of the constraints for lack of, strengthening that relation in the area of sports. And finally, the hospitality and tourism. We focused a lot on security and economy in the Turkey-Africa relations. We don't need, to focus a lot on guns anymore, on conflict resolution anymore. If you look at most of the young people, including myself, who've graduated from Turkish universities, we are the future of our continent. But then again, our knowledge won't be put into practice and, given to contribute to the rise of our continent if the areas of our talents and where we believe we can tap into the resources and
Right.
the potential is not given priority. So what are your thoughts on that? The digital
Okay.
economy, the sports, and the tourism and hospitality.
Thank you so much for those great questions. What's your name? You didn't say your name.
Yeah, I adopted a Turkish name, which was also my Kenyan name, but though it wasn't famous that. So Nuri is my name.
Okay, good. And you've directed all those questions to Ambassador Nur Saman. Yes, there you go. It's all for you.
Thank you for your questions. Actually, I didn't mention all these fields because there are so many fields that we should talk. So that's why we had to talk about specific issues. Do you know about the technologic bank that we have in Gebze? It's about all this digital economy and all this kind of. There is a special bank. That there are some African countries there, so I will be more than glad to explain to you what are we doing there. So I totally agree that we should work more on that, but there is a possibility. This is the UN organization, so I can talk to you and give you more details as we don't have so many times. About sports, I think that we are all good about sports. We have many, as you said, there are many players in Turkey, and I will be going soon to Senegal as ambassador. So I promised. Thank you. So I already promised that I will bring more football players from Senegal as well. And talking about hospitality and tourism, I agree with you about this, but you know what kind of cooperation we have with African countries is that we are dealing in what they ask. We are not, of course, we are telling them, that there are many students coming from different African countries to in some schools in Antalya, to some in tourism, in schools like tourism. But I think that maybe it's not priority yet for some African countries because they have some other conflicts. I agree with you because really, maybe I have seen around 15 countries in the continent, and really they are all like paradise. I mean, so tourism, it's a very important field, and in Turkey that we are very good in that. We are ready, but in our partnership, it's like that we are not imposing to our partners, look, let's work on that. So if they are asking us, of course we are ready, and we have lots of things to do. So I hope that when you will go back to your country, you will be working in this area. Thank you.
Murithi has something to say.
Yeah, just very quickly, those are great points, Nuri. And, we forget, of course, for example, on sports, how powerful soft power can be. Over the last few days, I've just been taking taxis, and then I asked the guys, they may not speak a lot of English, but I asked them, are you Fenerbahce or Besiktas? And they say Fenerbahce sometimes. And then I say, do you remember JJ or Coach? And they say, oh, yes. And that's a real icebreaker. So I think it's a really important way to unify populations. It's something we should definitely invest more in. And the digital point is really important because that's something actually that Africa has to tell the world a story about. When I'm at home, I rarely carry my wallet because mobile money has become so effective. It's something that was primarily pioneered on the continent, and it's something that we must remember. There's some things that the continent is doing right, and on hospitality, when you look at Turkey's hospitality industry, and actually the potential on the continent, there's a lot of learning to be done, including on costing, effective costing. It costs a fortune to go to a hotel in the coast of Kenya, and I was telling my friend next time we'll just come here because the prices are really good. So I think there are also, lessons to be learned among people with very different industries.
A round of applause, please. I'm going to wrap up, but if you have a question, just quickly summarize, and before you let this star-studded panel go scot-free. No? No? Okay. I'm going to go for your final words. I know that, I hope, inshallah, that my children will see an integrated Africa that works, that is peaceful and prosperous. I hope that in my lifetime I'll see it too, but we shall see. But I wanted to hear your final words. And I'll start with Ambassador Nursaman.
So just in few words, that I really think that strong Africa can change all the global downturn. Really, I think that Africa is the answer for all crises that we have. So I think, and I'm sure that many countries are aware of that, that Africa is now a strategic actor for the welfare of all the globe. So please be, I have hope. So I'm sure that you will see, and even me, I might see a prosperous and peaceful continent, because there is such a huge potential, and I believe in your young generations. I'm very proud to see these young people here talking, how much I admire them for what they are doing, and so seeing them and listening to them, it gives me hope. So we will see it. Even me, I will see it. Okay.
Amaka?
I guess I'll end where I started, which is just sort of reminding us that most industrialized countries took a while, several centuries, to go through this process of nationhood, which takes a lot of political settlement at home. And in many places, it was made easier by the fact that not everybody was included. Right? So in some ways, Africa is doing something that hasn't been done because everybody is included. It's one of the most diverse continents in the world in terms of ethnicity and language and backgrounds and all this stuff, and we're in a place where because we've adopted this idea of one person, one vote, we're trying to go through that process. We're settling everybody at the same time. So if we can figure that out, right, then the sky is our limit.
Yeah, Africa is a young continent. It's one that's urbanizing. It's one with immense natural resources, but beyond that, with a lot of human potential as well. I think, yes, we should look at it as a continent of opportunity, not as a problem to be resolved, but above all, I think it's up to African policymakers to have what I think Barack Obama called the fierce urgency of now. Amen. To actually push towards that goal rather than wait for it to be achieved organically.
Let somebody shout hallelujah. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've gleaned a couple of interesting points from this wonderful panel. Please put your hands together again for them. My name is Adeshawa Josh. Watch my show every Friday at 5:30 p.m. Africa Matters. I love you all. Thank you for sticking with us.